My introduction to ball playing, like, right, I was no more about 8 or 9, and a friend of mine, long since gone unfortunately, Larry Neville. Larry came up to me one day in Jurgriven Street, and he said, "Look, I'm going up Fair Hill, right, and I have a bowl here, will you come up?" Right, and I said, "Hello, like, bowl, like, I didn't, I hadn't seen one." At that time, I think I was about 9 or 10 years of age. So I went up Fair Hill with Larry all those years ago, and as far as I'm personally concerned, I didn't come down since.
Come all you gallant sportsmen and come along with me as we journey down an Irish country road. We'll watch the great bowl spin, we'll see Mick Barry win. From Cork to Armagh, we all know he's king of the bowling road.
When you saw Teddy at Long Bullets play, you sat and loved him all the sunshine day. From a poem by Jonathan Swift, written in Armagh, 1729.
Bowling is a traditional sport. The version of the game we play here in Cork and in Munster, in West Waterford as well, and in Armagh and Tyrone, primarily in the north, has, I suppose, developed in a particular way. Whether it's actually related to or a version of other similar sports, I suppose nobody can ever answer that question definitively. For a long, long period, the theory was that a family of related sports evolved in the northern part of Europe. And today, traditional games, somewhat similar to Irish road bowling, are played in Ostfriesland and Oldenburg in the North Sea coast of Germany, in Schleswig-Holstein in Germany, and then in the Netherlands. Of those games, the one in the Netherlands is the closest to the Irish game, played somewhat similarly, but traditionally on moors, on grass. The rules more or less the same, and there's a record of somewhat similar games being played in England and Scotland. So I suppose the theory was, that the game evolved across the north of Europe and that it might have come to Ireland through Dutch influences, through William of Orange or whatever, or it may have come as a hobby sport of weavers.
It is generally accepted that bowling came in by the migration of peoples. And in the 1600s, you had a lot of migration to the north following the Cromwellian Wars, a lot of settlers and plantations and so on. So you had people coming in, and these people were different to the Irish people, the old Gaelic people. These people who came in were very industrialised mindset. And they set up various industries like textiles, intensive agriculture, milling and all that kind of thing. And during the Napoleonic Wars, there was great demand for these type of commodities. So that these industries were reliant on expertise from the likes of Armagh, for instance, where the bowling was very popular. And these highly paid technicians, millwrights and that kind of thing, various types of craftsmen and tradesmen came down to the likes of Blarney, Bandon, Dunmanway, Clonakilty, Cork City to set up these industries and get them going. And then during their spare time, they were very interested in bowling in the lunchtime, etc., and so on, in the evenings. So the local people then who worked in these factories, they observed this going on and they took a fancy to it, and it got going from there.
I suppose you can say, look, there's credibility in all of that, but the thing that would make me question it deeply is the reality of the traditional sport in Italy. Because of all the traditional bowling games in Europe, the one in Italy is the one that is most closely resembles the Irish game. much more closely than the Dutch game. It's played on the road, it's played with a stone bowl, but there was a tradition in Ireland of playing with stone bowls. And up in Mayo, where the game is still played, back in the late 1990s, I was there and people were able to talk about local people who crafted these stone bowls. The Irish bowl, which is this one here, is effectively a cannonball. So we can presume that some resourceful Irish people saw these things and said, hang on a second, stone bowls get broken. So they said, look, let's try these things. So we play with cannonballs really, and the game is called bullets in Northern Ireland and bulleting in the west of Ireland. So it's clear that this was played with bullets. The thing about the Italian game that makes it really, really similar to the Irish game is it's played on the road and it's played again according to the same rules. And traditionally there was a rule in Ireland that when the ball stopped on the left-hand side of the road, you had to play the next shot from the left. When it stopped on the right-hand side, you had to play the next shot from the right. And that rule still exists in the Italian game. Now, to me, that's more than a coincidence. There's a very strong similarity, resemblance there. The other thing that has emerged in the recent past, and again, this has been a little bit dismissed, but I think more investigation is required. This is what are called hurling hairballs. And these are artefacts that have been found in bogs around the country, and they are reputed to be hurling balls made from horsehair. But these things are hard, rock hard. Now, maybe hurling was played with something really, really hard, but I think maybe a little bit more investigation needs to go on to say, well, hang on a second, these look exactly like the kinds of things that you would be using for bowling.
The Roman senator and historian Tacitus, in his book Germania, wrote considerably about the sport in Germany, where it was played with loam bowls, preferably on a hard frosty ground, and even on sheets of ice. 1800 years on, Michael Cusick documented and promoted Irish roll bowling and endeavoured to include it under the organisation of the GAA at the time of its genesis. But it was not to be. It was to remain a unique gem only in pockets of the country since.
Over to Ireland, County Cork to be exact, to watch some men breaking the law. It's the ancient road game of bowling. Mind you, it's 2 centuries since the law was passed, and no one would dream of enforcing it today. But the British administration of the time banned bowling as a dangerous and revolutionary game. Somehow the law's never been repealed, but the game goes on as it has from time immemorial.
In terms of the legality of the sport and the challenges, it's a good thing that there were ordinance and laws against it, because then this gave us a historical reference point. So you could see going back hundreds of years, and especially in the Dutch and the Germans have probably better records of this, where they could trace the origins of their sport back hundreds of years through somebody trying to ban it here or there. Or
The problem was, I think, that bowling, like drag hunting, for instance, bowling like drag hunting is a minority sport. It is popular in certain counties in Ireland, and it is popular amongst certain groups of the population. Like, it is usually popular with what we call, years ago, working class people, because they were off in the evening at 6 o'clock. They were free more or less at 6 o'clock. And to be popular with farmers too, when they'd have time to do it. But their work schedule was completely different. And it was, in one sense of the word, and this is quite true, it was kind of looked down on. And that often informed the legalities of it. And bowling today, you get the same thing today, where there's a certain amount of snobbishness with regard to it. That is something less than football or hurling or soccer or whatever. And the sport of drag hunting, which I was very interested in and am today, that was regarded similarly, rather than the hunting with horses and that kind of thing. So that shouldn't be ignored when you're discussing these kind of laws, these anti-bowling laws down through the years. Then, of course, it was like drag hunting then, it was also associated somewhat with drinking, because pubs and gambling, you see, them kind of things cannot be forgotten either. These prejudices were running through it for them reasons as well. It is kind of socio-economic as well, but thankfully a lot of that is dying out nowadays. And the good thing about bowling is that, and thankfully, that the itinerant community are very much involved in bowling today and always were, because they found it easy to get into and they distinguished themselves. And there was another reason of the ignorance of the times that was looked down on for that reason as well, like that there was hard men following bowling, which is, there was a kernel of truth in it, but very, very little.
There's records there of the bowling on the college road and the people objecting and they're shouting and, the Doubt Your Boy and all the rest of it. And that in back in the early days of the 20th century, like, and like the city was farming all the ways in along there. But as Michael said there about a simple sport, a cheap sport, that's one of the facts of the matter was that you needed no togs or football boots or anything, and that was what used to be brought up in court actually to saying that we can't afford to play the other games and others. So when there was the summoned for bowling, road bowling, which continued into our own new state. Like.
Once again we see the faces, the old playground and its strife, as fond memory it retraces happy hours of bygone life. Tim Delaney and Bill Bennett stand in battle's proud array. They'll be throwing in a minute, now they're clearing up the way. Here the bowl comes fast careering, running through the crowded school, and 1,000 throats are cheering for the bowling at Clancool.
Charlie Madden reading one verse from a poem about bowling on Clancool in Bandon. It was written many years ago by Pat Jones, who was a Bandon stonemason by trade.
Charlie Madden wrote a grand book there about lest we forget from this area, west, all the way west to West Cork, and covered nearly everyone there. There was huge crowds come out from the city to Bandon now, and places like that. They are following their bowl players like this famous Buck McGrath and other prominent names at that time. And how is they come? By train. The railway system into Bandon and out to West Cork like that, there into Clancool. That's how people travelled even to matches from clubs like that. The railway system was all over the place. Like, there's a grand book there. There's a marvellous job because that the ordinary man was mentioned that kept the show going the same as they do in other organisations. Along with, we'll say, the head people. And then when Bowl Common was formed, then it really made it a national organisation with rules and so on, because things were kind of serious enough before that, like when with no rules and that kind of, the Irish were famous, as Brendan Behan said, for the famous splits, like, So then they put it into one umbrella. Then Bowl Common ahead. Flor Crowley was my namesake. He became the chairman, and he was a national teacher. He said, made a famous statement. He said, towards the end of his days, he said, we were called dictators, he said, and we had to be, he said, to lay down the rule, he said, for not to have things right and straight and so on.
Gentlemen, there isn't any point in arguing. It has been arranged, and we cannot upset the arrangement now.
Alles is geregeld en die kan je nu niet weer omdraaien.
To completely upset our arrangements.
A new sense of dignity has been added to the game. Eamon Carroll, Secretary Bowl Common.
In my young days, it was absolutely necessary to have a big crowd in order to have any chance of winning. The bigger the crowd, the greater chance you had of winning, because the bigger the crowd, the bigger the backing you had, and the less danger that somebody who wouldn't have very much conscience about doing something wrong wouldn't be left to do anything wrong. But
like stopping the ball, you mean?
Like stopping a ball or walking out, and you might be throwing the ball. Walking out across your hand, which would be fatal to a good shot. So that we had to have a big crowd. We always used to take a lorry full of tough young men, and they were absolutely necessary then. But since then, since 1964, 54, we came together, a few of us, very few of us actually, and we formed this association on Bowl Common.
The tradition very much in bowling was that you supported the local person, or you supported somebody, for whatever loyalty, and then you would never support anybody against them. So you'd either support them, or if you weren't prepared to support them, you probably wouldn't turn up, or you certainly wouldn't be seen to be in the other camp. And You know, the great stories. I remember Eamon O'Carroll, who was a very, very famous person in the sport. He was the first secretary of the association. He's a guy who played golf at the very highest level. He played hurling for Waterford, and he was on the very first Lynn Rovers team to win the county championship, and he won bowling tournaments and so on and so forth. But I think he would admit by himself bowling was his number one sport by far. But he told a great story about the group from Ballinagree who were playing an important score. And at that time, way back, the idea was that a score was bound for a certain amount of money. So if I challenged somebody and I'd say, at the time, I would pay you for £1. £1 was a lot of money. And what would happen is all the supporters, all the people in the local village or parish or whatever would get their money together and they would come up with £1, and then you would go to the venue on the given day and you would play for the £1. But the problem they had in Ballinagree was that they had collected the £1 okay, but it was all in halfpennies and pennies and threepenny bits and sixpences and shillings and so on and so forth. And, well, you know, you still had £1, but it didn't quite look the right thing, you know, so you kind of couldn't come with all these things. It kind of looked as if you weren't really up to the mark. And it's a story of a kind of a delegation going to Teddy Quill, the famous Teddy Quill, and asking if he would exchange all of this money for a £1 note. And once this happened, they could go with, you know, they were respectable people then, and they could go to the event with their crispy £1 note. So, you know, it kind of, you know, give a sense of, you know, the sense of community. The whole community's reputation was riding not just on the performance of their hero, but the fact that they could produce a £1 note, not all the loose coins. I suppose that has changed in more recent times. There's less rigid loyalty to the local person, apart from places like Drina, you know, where I think that's very much still the case. And but always players will have a small group of people around them, and they will always be around them. So they will be their roadshower. And the roadshower's task is to put a piece of grass on the road called the sop, and this is the target. This is what the person aims for, so when they're throwing the shot. They, generally speaking, will have somebody back at the mark or the tip where they're throwing from to discuss it with them as well. So there's a lot of psychology involved. So the kinds of things they know about the person is, they know, I suppose, all the fears and failings that this person has, but also all their strengths. And I suppose their idea is that they try to get the player to play to their strengths. And the strengths can be around how they psychologically approach the game, but it can also be around how they physically play the game. So, you know, there would be players who would be really, really, really famous for being able to close out a competition in the last shot. And the last shot is very, very, very stressful because everything comes down to this one shot in a close competition. And some players are really, really good. They can pull it out of the fire, or they can defend their lead in the last shot. Now, of course, their roadshower will be reminding them of their strengths in that regard. And if they're maybe not so good, they would be trying to deflect this and get the person to think in a more positive way. Bowlers also, you know, no two bowlers throw the ball in exactly the same way. Now, the really, really top players can do all kinds of left and right spins, and they can do all kinds of things with it. But your average player can't really adjust their game that much. So they will always have 90% of right-handed players have a natural tendency to spin the ball to the right, and left-hand players to the left. There are exceptions to that, but you need to take that on board. So when you're marking the road, you need to take on board the camber of the road. You need to take on board if there's a particular tiny little track on the road, which most people don't see, but bowlers will see because it's been created by maybe the natural underlying surface of the road, or where the wheels of vehicles push it down in certain ways, or it's a little bit smoother. But there'll also be, you know, the idea of where do you need to play if the ball is going to be spinning right? Where do you need to play if the ball is going to be spinning left?
Veteran Jack O'Shea shows the way to the Irish team.
You get the line of the road, you tell your man the direction to play, and you try to stay there on the road until after he's delivering the ball.
But why is it necessary for you to show him the way? Why can't he pick his own road?
Well, it requires a bit of encouragement too. And some of the players are a bit green, and they'd require a bit of advice and direct them as to where to run in line to get the ball to hold the road as far as it could.
One bowl player of note could recall the advice of their mentor to keep your eyes on the sop of grass and nothing else. Even if Jesus himself came down out of the clouds above, take no notice of him. Jack O'Shea, Eamon Carroll and Flaw Crowley were just some of the big names in Ballcommon na hÉireann in his formative years. In 1954, the members of the newly formed association quickly set about organising the first official tournament. The current president of Ballcommon na hÉireann could recall the events of that year.
Liam O'Keefe of Waterfall, born in Waterfall in 1930. Got very fond of bowling in my younger days because all the big bowling scores used pass up my way, and I was followed the games, and I was thinking someday I might be able to emulate how good those men were. Could I be as good as them? That was when I was 7 or 8 or 9 or 10 years of age. I still got very fond of it. It was my favourite game. I did play a bit of hurling football, but I was no good at that. And I suppose how I got fond of the game at all was there was a couple of local men here, Dan and Tim Hurley. They were famous senior bowlers, and we were friendly enough with them along. So I remember one day I was with my father, and they gave me a small bowl, and they said, someday you might be a bowl player. And it was a 16-ounce bowl that time. No, they were for small young lads like. So that was the very start of my bowling career. I kept that bowl. In fact, I still have it. How I got involved in the big times, I went down to Bantry, and I worked there actually. I got a job in Bantry, and I was down there for 5 years. But I remember I worked in a hotel, and this man, Percy McSweeney, came into me and told me that they were starting a big senior championship in Waterfall and Clonroe and Dublin Hill. There were 3 roads made out. And would I take part? I said I would. I gave my name and took part. And I played 5 scores in that championship.
They called it the All-Ireland, right? But it wasn't the All-Ireland because there were only players from the south, It was only later on that the bowl players from Armagh, or the bullet throws as they were known, right, came aboard, to create what we call, rather euphemistically at the same time, the All-Ireland, right? But at that stage, and the final of the Munster Championship, the winner was Liam O'Keefe on the day. In fact, it took 2 Sundays to finish the score because such was the crowd, such was the attendance, that the score meandered along almost. So when ducks fell on day 1, the markings had to be put down on the road, and the score was resumed the following Sunday.
It was a fine sporting score. We were great friends because we were nearly neighbours. We went to school together, and it was out of the 62 that took part that year. It was strange to have the 2 nearly neighbours take part in the final with men from all over the county. It was a big occasion for me to win it. That was the month. It was the month of November, but the weather was something like the mid of summer. 2 days were brilliant for that game. But the excitement in the parish was wonderful. The people in Waterfall all locked up the doors to go. In fact, Mrs. O'Shea and the Waterfall pub closed down the pub. She told them all, no drink. We'll be back here at 7 or 8 o'clock, and we'll have we must all go to see the game because they're 2 local men. Another man nearby, a big farmer, Jimmy Horan, cancelled the cows being built and told them in to be off for a few hours, and they were off for the day. So the whole parish was idle until 7 or 8 o'clock in the evening when the game was over. So that was one great good feeling in the parish that happened.
Oh, one day as I went for a ramble, all alone by myself I did stray. Oh, and I met with a gay young deceiver while walking along the byway. Her eyes, they shone like the diamonds and I thought her the queen of the land. Oh, and her hair was thrown over her shoulder and tied with a black velvet band. Well, next day I was hunted and captured. All alone in the dock I did stand, and I was charged with robbing and stealing, all for loving her black velvet band.